Tonight the man will die. In some ways, the city already seems resigned to it. The Beirut dusk uncharacteristically flat, cloudy, a peculiar staleness rippling through the trees like wind. It's easy to costume the earth for grief, and tonight the birds perched upon the tangled electricity wires look like mourners in their black and white feathers, staring down at the concrete refugee camps without song.
Pearl was sanctified, but I take credit for bringing out the devil in her. She was in church every Sunday singing it up to Jesus, but on Saturday nights, I'd twist her arm to come out with me to this joint called the Gemini. I'd play on her guilt by telling her I was going with or without her. And didn't she want to keep her only sister out of trouble? Worked every time. Mostly because deep down I think she wanted it to work. But Sister Pearl would never admit that. The Gemini had an open mic hour with a live backing band, and that's how we got on. Pearl would refuse to sing anything fun. For some reason, she hated the word baby. She thought it was too worldly or some nonsense. So that knocked out a lot of the Motown hits right there. And honey, this was 1969, 1970 Detroit.
Amadeo Padilla is Jesus. The hermanos have been preparing in the dirt yard behind the morada. This is no silky-haired, rosy-cheeked, honey-eyed Jesus. No Jesus of the children, Jesus with the lambs. Amadeo is muscled, hair shaved close to a scalp scarred from teenage fights. Roll of skin where skull meets neck.
At night, I lay beside her and put my arms around her, 2 blankets covering us. She shivered in the night even when it was still hot. She died July 15th, the day that the devotees climbed the waterfalls in Sodo, seeking penance from Metblo, seeking healing and renewal.
The child lies on the shore. All around him, the beach is littered with the wreckage of the boat and the wreckage of its passengers. Shards of decking, knapsacks cleaved and gutted, bodies frozen in unnatural contortion. Dispossessed of nightfall's temporary burial, The dead ferment indecency. There's too much of spring in the day, too much light.
Welcome, everyone. Hello. I'm Adrienne Broder. I'm the Executive Director of Aspen Words, and we are so thrilled to be here, to be back in person in New York City at the Morgan. So thank you all so much for coming. For those of you who are new to us, Aspen Words is a literary nonprofit and program of the Aspen Institute, whose mission it is to encourage writers, inspire readers, and connect people through the power of stories. We're here tonight to announce the winner of the Aspen Words Literary Prize, the 2022 winner, but we're also here, equally important to us, is to celebrate all 5 of these extraordinary books and their brave and brilliant authors. Literature has always been and will always be a powerful tool for creating empathy because it puts societal issues into context by embedding them into personal stories about individuals and families and communities. And the goal of the Aspen Words Literary Prize, of course, is to spotlight works of fiction that illuminate critical issues, give perspective, build compassion, and create dialogue, while all at the same time doing that in beautiful prose. We'd like to give heartfelt thanks to our judges, Angie Cruz, Danielle Evans, Ann Friedman, and Kiese Lehman. None of us envy the decisions they've had to make. We would also like to acknowledge and thank and celebrate all of you who are behind these books, all the people who work to produce these books. And by that I mean agents and editors, publicists, marketing folks, designers, all of you. Championing books is just a colossally collaborative effort, and it takes a village. And lastly, I'd like to thank all the rest of you, book lovers, art supporters. You really have made this evening happen and make literature happen. So thank you so much for being here. I'll turn it over to Carol and Tori.
Thanks, Adrienne. I know you're all here to see the incredible authors we're celebrating, not us, so I will keep these thank yous brief. I want to start by thanking tonight's presenting sponsors, Zibby Owens and Peter Rigby. Thank you to the members of the Aspen Words Advisory Board. Many of you traveled quite a ways to be with us tonight. Thank you to the Creative Council, our National Council donors, and the Aspen Institute Society of Fellows members. Also thanks to our publishing industry sponsors, Audible, Janklow and Nesbitt, and the Amazon Literary Partnership. With Audible's support, you all heard the wonderful audio excerpts in the opening video. And out in the lobby, make sure you pick up your 1-month Audible gift card before you leave, a gift from us to you. Thanks to the incredible Aspen Words team who put this evening together, Elizabeth Nix, Mallory Kaufman, Madeline Lipton, and Ivy Chalmers, who is holding down the fort back in Aspen at the Pitkin County Library's live stream party. And I know there are many others all across the country tuning in, so thanks for being with us. Finally, thank you to the anonymous donors whose extraordinary gift has made this prize possible in perpetuity.
And now I'd like to invite our head judge, Danielle Evans, onto the stage. Danielle is the author of the award-winning collections, The Office of Historical Corrections, and Before You Suffocate Your Own Full Self. She was also an Aspen Words Literary Prize finalist last year. Danielle.
Good evening, everybody. I can't see you, but I'm sure that you're beautiful. It is an honor and a privilege to be here celebrating these wonderful books tonight. Our judging this year began in December from a long list of 16 books, and then we took months to get that list down to these 5 finalists, and then one winner who will be announced shortly. It's been a pleasure and an honor during these tumultuous months to spend time with all of these books with sharp voices, distinct characters, innovative storytelling structures, and for all of their varied approaches to literature, a clear sense of both the structural forces we're up against as humans and the reasons we find for surviving. The Aspen Prize asks the jury to consider 2 criteria: the lasting literary value of a text and its work in illuminating a vital contemporary issue. In some ways, the books on the long list make it clear just how many issues we are reckoning with in the contemporary world. Climate change, racism, violence, poverty, lacking infrastructure, displacement, the difference between individual and collective progress, all manner of present and inherited trauma. In another way, it felt to me like the books were in a kind of conversation, illuminating the question literature keeps asking us: how do we find a way to believe in the future when it seems to be disappearing? As often as fiction writers focus on the big and serious problems, there is something inherently hopeful about sitting down to write a novel or a short story. It's slow work in a culture where quick attention is available elsewhere. It's work that both preserves our present world and imagines it differently, work that, in spite of its awareness of everything threatening it, believes there is a future waiting, one in which we can and still do read books, one in which there's a reader waiting for a story to arrive, a reader who may need a particular book at a particular moment. I don't know some days how or why I believe we may still get that future, only that when I sit down to write, I have to believe that. I'm in awe of the way the books on this shortlist reckon with all of the structural forces that give us the right to be hopeless. These authors do not sugarcoat or make sentimental the real and urgent problems of the world, but they also do not let trauma or tragedy erase the particularity of their characters and the vibrant lives they live. We believe in the future one day at a time, these books seem to say. We believe in the future by holding ourselves accountable, or forgiving ourselves, or imagining an alternative, or finding a way to center ourselves in a narrative that would push us aside if it were someone else's story. We believe in the future, even when we believe we'll have to fight for it, and that, I think, is one of the true values of literature. It's not an instruction manual, but a reminder of what we have to save. Though it has been a joy to spend time with these books, at times during the judging process, I joked that it was like getting the cursed version of a child's wish. I'd like to grow up and read all the time, I must have thought at some point, and then suddenly I had so many books to read, but all at once, and then we could only choose one winner. We did manage to choose a winning book, which we are delighted to celebrate shortly, but first I want to emphasize that the committee really loved all of the books on our shortlist, and it's an honor to be sharing a stage with all of these writers and to be sharing a world with their work. So thank you all for these books. I'm going to call the writers to the stage now. Omar El-Akkad, the author of What Strange Paradise, unfortunately is unable to be here tonight, but I would like to call the remaining finalists up. Hala Alyan, author of The Arsonist City. Miriam Shamsi, author of What Storm, What Thunder. Kirsten Valdez-Quaid, author of The Five Wounds. And Donnie Walton, author of The Final Revival of Opal and Nav. And now I'd like to welcome Aspen Institute CEO and President Dan Porterfield.
Good evening, everybody. Thank you so much for being here. It's an incredible pleasure to be in person after 2 years of reading and Zooming and trying to catch up with friends and meet new friends and hear new voices the best we could. And I so want to thank our leaders, Adrian and Carolyn, for your incredible work to pull it together in person today. Thank you so much again. And I have a few moments to speak a little bit about the work of the Aspen Institute and how a literary prize fits in. And then I'll have the honor of introducing our moderator, Mary Louise Kelly, who will be in conversation with our finalists this evening. In addition to thanking the two of you and your team for making this possible, I really want to thank all of you for how many hours could it have been? Thousands and thousands. How many redrafts? How many friends or partners did you show something to, or agents or colleagues, only to say, oh no, I've got to do something else. It's incredible. I think a lot of us know what it takes, and you're an inspiration to all of us. Thank you so much. Now, I know some of you are wondering, so what is the Aspen Institute? And we are a global nonprofit organization that actually came out of the global trauma of World War II, with the Holocaust and with forced migration and with nuclear devastation and tremendous anxiety about the state of humanity. We actually were called the Aspen Institute for Humanistic Studies when we came into being. And we were founded on an animating value, a value among all values, which is human dignity. The idea that every single person has human dignity, that no one has more dignity than anyone else, that it is shared equally by all of us, whatever our station, whatever our circumstances, whatever our character or our virtues. It's actually a very difficult idea to hold on to and really embrace, because if every person has dignity, then every person has a claim. And I think our novelists helped us to hear the claim of many through your voices. Again, we thank you so much for that, and that's one of the reasons why we have a literary prize, so that we can organize ourselves to hear voices from all perspectives, from all realities, in order to better live our own humanity and build a better society. Now, the Institute does that, the society building, in all kinds of ways. We work to promote economic equality. We work to address structural racism. We work to foster leadership development. We bring people together around tables that are uncomfortable sometimes to talk about first principles for why they believe a certain approach should be taken to make a difference on, say, community college education or on public health. There's a wide canopy of work that we do. It's all around this idea, again, though, that for the good of the one and the many, we should call and center the notion of human dignity. And so when some people say, well, I get that you do so much social policy work, Aspen, I get it. Why literature and the arts again? And the answer to that question, well, I'll give two. Maybe the first one I'll give is what Danielle and Adrian said, that we believe that great literature invites us into new minds and new sensibilities, allowing us to see the world from perspectives other than our own. And that awakens moral imagination. And that if the ability to imagine someone else's inner life and social world is where compassion begins, then storytelling is the art that kindles that fire. We also have a second answer to that question. And this one's a little bit derivative. We believe in the power of literature to be a central part of the Aspen Institute's work to build a better society, because James Baldwin told us that. He wrote one time, "Society must accept some things as real, but the writer must always know that visible reality hides a deeper one, and that all our action and achievement rest on things unseen. A society must assume that it is stable, but the artist must know, and he or she must let us know, that there is nothing stable under heaven. The artist cannot and must not take anything for granted, but must drive to the heart of every answer and expose the question that the answer hides." And I really feel that you have done that with your work today. And so I think James Baldwin's looking down and saying, way to go, Aspen, especially way to go to our authors. So that's why we host a literary prize. And it's exciting for us to be able to make a $35,000 annual award and to an influential work of literature while surfacing many works that are doing this incredible cultural work of revealing the questions that are hidden beneath our answers, as Mr. Baldwin said. So, as you know, these 5 writers created from their own brains and nothing but their imagination in the lives of those they listened to, these great works of art. And it'll be a lot of fun to hear you in dialogue today with Mary Louise Kelly. I think many of you know her. She's the host of All Things Considered, which is NPR's flagship national evening news magazine. Her recent interview subjects range from Secretary of State Anthony Blinken and CIA Director William Burns to Matt Damon and Paul McCartney. Previously, Mary Louise served as national security correspondent for NPR News, and her assignments have included North Korea, Russia, Pakistan, Afghanistan, Iran, Iraq, and very important to the Aspen Institute, because we have a center there, Ukraine. So, Mary Louise, thank you so much for being with us today, and let's have a great time.
Good evening, everybody. Hello. How lucky am I tonight? How lucky are we to be in the company of brilliant writers doing amazing, important things, to be in this wonderful space, in this wonderful library, in this wonderful city. And man, has it felt like it's been a long time coming. I will say, Adrian talked me into moderating this 2 years ago, late spring of 2020. And I was so excited to say yes, because I thought the event sounded great and the books were all great, and I was so excited to come to the Morgan Library, and needless to say, it never happened. I did moderate this event last year for Danielle's class when we were all tiny little inch-high people on a Zoom screen, which was not quite the same. So I kind of feel like wherever the conversation goes tonight, total victory, total triumph. Y'all, we made it. We're here. Welcome to each of you. And welcome to Omar, who is here in spirit, if not in the flesh. Men can also write great fiction, apparently, though you wouldn't know it. Here's how I'm going to run tonight. We get 50 minutes to talk, which is going to fly. I am going to, I think, spend a minute or two with each of you just to give people a little taste of your book, where it's set, what you were trying to do, in case not everyone has yet made it through all the fabulousness that awaits when you do get to read them all. And then I've got a bunch of threads that I want us to all pull on and tease out a little bit together. Why don't we start at the end and work our way down? Hala.
Hi.
You have written a fantastic novel
Thank you.
about a family who started in Beirut. They're from Beirut. They have moved to California. So these are immigrants to America. They've raised their family here. They never sold the family house back in Beirut, and the plot circles and loops back, and this house is a whole character in and of itself, which we may get to. I want to ask, to me, the human character of yours that will stick with me is the matriarch, who is a piece of work, as my mother-in-law would say. Describe Masna. Who is she?
Mesna is a Syrian woman coming of age in the late 60s and early 70s in Damascus, who wants to move to Hollywood and become a big star. Who starts doing theater work, and around the time that the civil war breaks out in Lebanon, ends up meeting a couple of, a Lebanese man and a Palestinian man, and starts doing these like bi-weekly weekend trips to Beirut and falls in love with it. And then tragedy strikes and finds herself in California after all, but nowhere near Hollywood, and sort of assigned the role of an immigrant's wife, and kind of reluctantly strapped into a life that was not what she had envisioned for herself, and she makes everybody pay for it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
She's totally devious, manipulative, and yet I was rooting for her the whole book.
It's really funny because I had given it to my dad to read, and he was like, "I hate her," and I was like, I never felt that way. I think she's a character that does what she needs to do to survive, and it's not particularly graceful or appealing behavior, but she's also had, like, her life hasn't been particularly easy. I very much root for her.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Was she the one, I don't know, we can get into process and kind of how you come to your story and it becomes a book, but was she the one you started with? She just feels so alive.
So it's kind of a ridiculous story. So I had while I was finishing up edits on the first novel, my first novel, Saw Houses, I had a dream. Literally, I just had a dream, and the dream was about a woman, and the woman was like my grandmother, but not my grandmother. I'm literally telling a bunch of people my dream, which is like everyone's nightmare. But like, and the woman was like, she was like the Syrian woman, and she wanted to move to Hollywood. I cannot stress how much this character and that plot just came fully formed, and I woke up and like wrote everything I could remember, and then I had like 8 single space pages, and I sent them to my brother who's here, and he was like, I don't know what this is. Like, I don't know what to make of this, and then I just like kind of hung on to her. I still had the other novel to sort of take care of. Then when it came out, I was working on a series of short stories about expat, like the expat community in Beirut, but I just kept going back to this character, and then I finally kind of found a way to sort of weave it all together. But yeah, she could not have been more vivid.
No.
And I do not want to give the impression that like my stories come to me in my dreams ever. I think this was a one and done thing, and I was very lucky. But yeah,
I am trying not to hate you that your
I think it's never going to happen
fully
again.
formed and ready to go.
It's never going to happen again.
Yeah.
But I think it was also at a time when I was thinking a lot about my grandmother, and I think there was something about her that was sort of the antithesis to kind of my grandmother's generation of like a certain kind of Arab woman, and sort of like long suffering and quiet and like, like lovely and warm, and like the family comes first. And then this character came that was sort of like, I hate all of this, and kind of really revolted against it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Miriam, you have written a novel set in around about the 2010 earthquake in Haiti. And it's a novel that totally hangs together, but it's also 10 short stories, each a different character. That's the way I read it. You're disagreeing a little bit?
I'm a terrible short story writer, so I don't see it that way, but I know a lot of people have read it in that way.
Well, I'll say it's each one's a different character.
Yes.
And I was resisting that as I read it, because I was so invested in the character I was reading in that it would flip to a new one, and I would spend the first couple of pages thinking, no, I don't. I want to hear what happened to him in the last chapter. Like, let's stay with him. But it ends up being all of their stories, and you're learning about what happened to him in the last chapter through what's happening to her in this chapter. Why did you write it that way? So
initially, I actually had 13 narrative voices that were giving voice to the 2010 earthquake. The decision to do that was because I wanted it to echo how people on the ground call the earthquake, which is 12, which is 12 in Creole or French. And I wanted to have as many narrative voices as possible because I wanted somehow to encompass the great death toll of the earthquake. Over 300,000 people died, many of whom will never be named, never be memorialized. And so I wanted to tackle having as many narrative voices as possible. And then that got squeezed down to 10, one of whom repeats, which is Malou, the market woman, who holds everything together in terms of the beginning and end of the novel. The decision to move through those narrative voices rather than go back and forth had something to do with having the reader experience the ways in which people's lives were ultimately shattered, whether they, survived, did not survive, or had to live with, the cataclysm, the aftermath of the earthquake. And so that movement had to do with making sure that the reader could feel that fracturing. So if you loved a character, you had to lose that character for a moment and move on to another narrative voice, and also a different reflection upon the earthquake, a different feeling about that experience. Right. And so it was also trying to move away from the massification that occurs around tragic events in the news cycle, where we tend to think of people as groupings as opposed to individuals or families or communities, that experience those catastrophes, some often in very different ways. And so that's why there was that kind of, fracturing between the narrative voices.
Were you in Haiti in 2010?
I was not in Haiti in 2010. I was in Cincinnati, Ohio, about to teach a seminar when, my phone started going off, and I couldn't actually look to see what happened. I received a text that said, you need to look at the news as soon as you can. But I had a 3-hour seminar. So I went in, and my seminar was at 5, and the earthquake happened a few minutes before 5 p.m. on January 12, 2010. And when I came out, it was to all these messages about what had happened, and, for anyone, I was born in Haiti, so Port-au-Prince is my hometown. It was really a terrible several weeks, several month period of trying to track people down, and then of course helping others to track people there. And so what I tried to do in the novel as well was to reflect not only what it was like for people on the ground, but what it was like for people like myself with intimate ties to Port-au-Prince, who had to, as my father would say, live with the helplessness of being so far away.
You have one character who learns about what's happening. He's a taxi driver in Boston, and he hears it on NPR, which I appreciated. But it did make me wonder, given that you're writing about something that happened, and not that long ago, why tell this story as a novel? Why fiction? Why not a masterful magazine piece? You could have profiled a bunch of people and told their stories.
So for a couple of reasons. One is that I had no intention of writing a novel. So when the earthquake happened, I'm also a literary critic, a scholar, so I was called upon to give a lot of talks on the earthquake about best practices for intellectuals who wanted to work on Haiti, or for people who were wondering what kinds of resources they should provide, to people on the ground. And so I did that for several months, at least for a 6-month period. I was on the road, usually twice a week, and then into a 3-year period of doing this, on a weekly, monthly basis. And during that time, there were wonderful, journalists and activists like Beverly Bell who, were doing that kind of nonfiction work of interviewing people on the ground and so forth. And she has a wonderful book, Fault Lines, that people should read, that is that nonfiction book. But what happened for me, because I've always done creative writing and scholarship, is that I realized around 2013, when books were coming out of writers from Port-au-Prince and also Caribbean, painters and artists were starting to reflect on the earthquake, I realized that when I had been giving my talks, people would come up to me after and tell me their stories of the earthquake or what they had lost. But people had been doing that all along because they assumed that at some point I would write a novel. And I had been invested with this kind of trust, but I would get it right when I did so. But it didn't occur to me until several years after that this was a kind of a public charge. And so then what I also realized, this is when Haiti was really starting to fall out of a news cycle around 2013, or in terms of the earthquake, and I was still working on these issues, and even now in 2022, I'm still working on these issues. And I realized that a lot of people did not remember that a cataclysmic earthquake had occurred. They did not realize the death toll, the level of insecurity that was taking place, and that a novel might be one of the only ways that I could gather people's attention, but also to, as the sponsors, the prize directors were indicating, really make people feel sympathy, if not empathy, for what happened in Haiti, to redirect the conversation. And I think this is something that only fiction can do.
Kirsten, you have also written a wonderful novel about a family, the Padilla family. This is set in New Mexico. And I loved, it's about generations of this family. There's one line I want to quote and then ask you about. You write, "Generations of injury chewed like blight into the leaves of the family tree, shaken skulls, knocking teeth, snapped wrists, collisions and brawls, and fatal intoxication." A lot of that, especially the intoxication piece, applies to a particular member of the family, Amadeo, who's a total disaster. He can't hold a job. He can't get a job. He can't hold a job. He drinks beer all day. And the novel opens, we got a little bit of a taste in the reading we just heard, but the novel opens with the most improbable scene imaginable, which is that Beer Breath Amadeo has just been selected to play Jesus Christ in a Good Friday procession. Describe what happens.
Yeah, so I think you've described Amadeo exactly. He is a disaster. He is estranged from his teenage daughter. He hasn't been present in her life at all. And Amadeo's really aware of his failings. And when he's given the chance to play this role, he thinks that if he throws himself into it and does the very best, most realistic performance, then he will redeem his life and become a new person. And as he's preparing for the Good Friday procession, Angel, his teenage daughter, shows up incredibly pregnant on his doorstep and announces that she's moving in. And he's really, really resentful of her for that.
For wrecking his big shot at.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He's also a little bit pleased that she'll be in the audience because he wants an audience. But yeah, so at the end of the opening of the novel, on Good Friday, he, in his performance, asks that real nails be used for the crucifixion. And in the moment that he's being nailed to the cross, he catches his daughter's eye and realizes what everybody else knows, which is that this is not how he's going to change his life, that real change is going to come from, being in his daughter's life and being a part of it.
He ends up in the emergency room with his teenage daughter saying, "Dad, you idiot, what were you thinking?"
Yeah, she's pissed.
She's more mature than he is. And I wondered, again, back to that quote, you're talking about things that go down the generations in this family. But I wondered a little bit if you were showing us his 15-year-old daughter, who seems to have way more common sense than he does, pushing back a little bit, saying, you know what, we don't have to inherit everything our parents might want to lay on us.
And, that really is that's Angel's role. She's determined not to repeat the mistakes that her parents have made. And she throws herself she goes to a teen parent program where she's earning her GED, and she's determined to give a good life to her baby. And she gives both of her parents a really hard time.
There are all kinds of Christian and religious themes and symbolism that go through the book. Would you share a little bit of what you were saying right before we came on stage? You were saying you've been getting invitations from Christian groups who want you to come talk, and then you realize, I don't know that they've read this book.
Well, it's true. I use, particularly in the sections in Amadeo's point of view, he's really grappling with what that story means, and the meanings he takes from the story of Christ's crucifixion shifts as the novel progresses. I would say that. Yeah, I think there are places where the novel is really critical of a lot of these interpretations of the story, and it was a bit scary to write about Jesus because it's such a familiar story and is deeply meaningful to so many people. But I'm really, really interested in how these stories resonate and how the meaning we take from all of these received stories that we're so familiar with, how that can change depending on what we're experiencing in our own lives.
Donnie, I will say, as I read your book, I was laughing at so many places, and I felt like I hadn't met you at the time, but I felt like I could hear you cackling along as you were writing.
Oh, those were the best parts.
Yeah?
Laughing, yeah.
There were so many times where you threw two characters in a room, and I could sense you sitting there just thinking, let's see what happens with these two. Where's this going to go? Did you have fun writing it?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
It took you forever, though, if I may say.
It did. It took a very long time. I started.
7 years?
almost, 7, 8 years. Started in 2013. I was working as a journalist. I was an editor in magazines, and doing that thing where you wake up before the sun rises to get some writing time in before I went to my day job. So I did that for a couple of years before I decided to really have a go at it full time.
Yeah. There's so many characters worth asking about, but your story centers, I think, fair to say, on this rock duo, fictional rock duo in the 70s, a very unlikely rock duo. Tell us who they are, how they come to be a pair.
Yes, so they are Opal and Nev of the title. Opal Jewell is a Black American woman born in Detroit, and she sort of grows up lower middle class, single mother with her half-sister Pearl, who seems more talented, prettier, all those things. But Opal has always, from childhood, had a real fighting spirit, despite things that would seemingly go against her. And in 1970, she is singing in a nightclub and amateur night, and she meets Nev Charles, who has a different kind of background. He is a white Englishman, grew up in Birmingham, and they are similar in the sense that they both sort of grow up feeling like misfits, and there's sort of a connection there. He's already made a solo record that has sort of flopped, and he has this label head that says, Gimme Shelter's a big hit, and we're gonna copy what the Rolling Stones did with Mary Clayton. You're gonna find a Black girl singer. And so they get together, and the rest of the book just sort of follows their journey, the ups and the downs of it.
And they're getting back together. The final revival, as we gather from the title. I mean, it struck me as I was reading it, and people listening will have gathered if they haven't read yet. It's all about music, about this great music, and it struck me. Because we wrestle all the time at NPR, purely audio medium. You can't see anything. How do you cover an art show? How do you cover fashion when you can't see it? It takes real talent to bring that to life. And you set yourself up something of a similar challenge. This whole novel about great music, and we can't hear any of it. How did you approach that?
Music is incredibly difficult to write about. And the thing that I sort of leaned into was my own fandom, especially when I was growing up, a teenager, and there was so much interesting happening in music at the time. And I remember having physical reactions in my body when I would hear different songs that I felt were huge or revolutionary or life-changing. And so, there's a character in the novel, Sunny, who's the journalist who is interviewing everyone, and she breaks into the oral histories to give narration. And there's a scene, which is probably the scene that's most true to myself personally, when she is describing hearing an Opal and Nev record for the first time and almost having sort of a fear response in her body. And that happened to me, like in the early 90s. I remember coming home from school and seeing the Smells Like Teen Spirit video for the first time by Nirvana. And feeling absolutely terrified, and like I wanted to run out of the room in a weird way, but also really being into it, like really drawn to it. And I feel like every time I sort of approach music from how I'm reacting to it, it feels very accurate.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I would agree.
Thank you.
So 4 really different books, but let me throw out a couple of things that struck me that I was feeling come through in each of your pages. One is secrets. Your characters keep so much from each other. They are holding so much back. They're lying to the people who they love. And I'm intrigued partly because I was, intrigued by the story, by the plot, but also how, as writers, you all thought about that. How much to let the reader, how much to let us in on any of it? Because, you're trying to create suspense and tension and keep us turning the pages, even though you're not writing a thriller. how do you figure out, am I achieving that or am I just confusing the hell out of everybody? Hala, I'll throw that one to you first because boy, do your characters have some secrets.
They do. They do. I mean, I think, okay, so I love the AA expression of you're only as sick as your secrets. And I think there's something about that that's very true, but I also think that we need secrets a lot of times folks need secrets to survive. And I think people are also owed their secrets. And there's there's a scene in the book where someone sort of says that to one of the adult siblings who's they're snooping around and trying to figure out what their parents were up to and what secrets they were keeping in the 70s. And the brother's girlfriend basically says your mom is owed secrets. She's owed a history. She's owed a life that you don't necessarily need to know anything about. And I think that there is something to that. You see, the difficult thing in this family is that the secrets they keep from each other are what allows them to continue to be a family. And I think that that's unfortunately, I think that that's true in a lot of relational dynamics, that there are certain things that we keep from, like you're saying, the people that are closest to us or those that we love the most, but that without those, we may not be able to continue the relationships or continue to have intimacy with people. And I don't just mean relational, romantic. I mean, there's a lot of intimacy in this particular family. They are so all up in each other's business, especially the mother. And without there being these boundaries that are set up, I just don't know how I don't know how it would have survived.
Because it's a form of kindness in a way to each other. It's a form of love to hold something and say, you don't need to be burdened with that? I
think there's a little bit of that, and I also think that there is I think there's also a secret. I'm also spoiler, it doesn't really matter. There's also a secret that in the book about one of the children's identity that is kept from the child. And then the child becomes an adult and eventually finds it out. And then that kindness is on display when the child then protects the parent from it, because the child thinks the parent doesn't know it. And so you sort of see this thing in the end where both the parent and the child are hiding the same thing from each other because they assume that it'll devastate the other. And so you get this kind of balance in the book of the secrets that continue throughout the book, and then the ones that end up being revealed between the characters. And then I think this is a long-winded way of saying that I think that trying to write it out was complicated because I did constantly have to battle how much do I let the reader in on certain things and how much do I allow something to surprise folks. And so I did decide in the end to keep a secret, a single secret from the reader, which felt good.
Did you know from the start quite some of what you were going to unearth, or was it as you were going,
I didn't know that these characters were going to be such pathological liars. Which I don't know what that says about me. That they're oh, you know how you're everything in your dreams, you're kind of everything in your books. I didn't realize that they were going to be so up to so many hijinks. I think that I did find myself kind of to what you were saying, Donnie, the idea of putting characters in a certain room and sort of being uh-oh, what's going to happen now is one of the most delightful things about writing for me. And so I knew the core secret, which is that the mother keeps something from the husband and from the children, and that's the way she sort of survives this unexpected, banal life in the States. But beyond that, they kind of popped up as I was writing them.
Yeah. Miriam, you're nodding as though you have something you want to add, because you've got some secrets going on among your characters.
Yeah, I was thinking, are there really secrets? But I think it's what Hala is saying about this idea of survival, that some secrets are about, the survival of the individual. So in my novel, there are 3 different family groups. A group of siblings, 2 parents who are in their 30s who will lose their children. And then there's a triad of, Malou, the grandmother, her grandchild Anne, who's an adult, and her son, Richard, who's a multimillionaire. And so in the book, secrecy is more about shame. So you have her son who is ashamed of his mother. He's ashamed of being the child of a market woman. So he, has become a multimillionaire. He never tells anyone about his family. Anne is a secret child that he left behind in Haiti. And so he never tells anyone. And when he goes back to Haiti before the earthquake, it's in fact because his wife has found out about this child that he had as a young person. And then with the siblings, you mentioned Didier, the cab driver in Boston. He actually left Haiti to become a musician. He wanted to become famous. It didn't work out. So he doesn't tell his family that he's not doing very well. And then in the family with the two parents, with the children, one of whom is dying in the process of the novel, the husband, Olivier, leaves for a different camp where he's been promised work, but he doesn't tell his wife that really what's happening is that he's so heartbroken over the loss of her younger children that he can't deal with that trauma. So he keeps to himself this sort of shame around the fact that his life has been destroyed. And so he doesn't know how to face that. So he leaves, and she doesn't know where he's gone. And she's probably the only person, except for Malou, the market woman, who keeps no secrets, and the child as well, who's too pure for keeping a secret. So I think it's more about shame, and I think I was trying to get at something that Hala is talking about, which is really, how do we accept our loved ones when, shame is something that disallows us from being completely truthful, completely open, and yet it is part of a process of being part of a family, understanding one another, and in community, of healing ourselves and moving forward. So all of that, in my case, all of that is exposed to the reader. There are very few secrets, except that you find out who's connected to whom and in what way as you go through the story cycles. So,
Either of you want to jump in on this one, or I have another? Donnie.
Yeah, sure. I mean, so there is a very explosive secret almost exactly at the midpoint of Opal and Nev. And I won't spoil it, but, I think it just sort of becomes an engine for the second half of the book in a way that I never really expected as the writer, because the secret was a surprise to me. But, I started this novel sort of writing about my dream rock star, and sort of thinking about what her life would be in this era of music that I'm fascinated by. But when I was thinking about who she was as a Black woman and thinking of all the things that she would have faced or that might have happened to her, the story began to become much more complicated and much more rich, and the secret does come to light. And when it's revealed on the current timeline, it just has so many ripples and repercussions, and kind of just drives toward the end of the novel.
And when you say the secret was a surprise to you, and it's halfway through, just take me there. What does that look like? You're sitting there typing, and what? There's an aha moment, and you get up and...
So I was finishing a scene that sort of fills the reader in on information that I've held back from them for the first half of the novel, which is what happens at this concert in 1971 that puts Opal and Nev in the headlines. And I had sort of an antagonist character speaking, and I was sort of wrapping up the chapter, and he says what he says. I'm in grad school. I'm in Iowa City in an attic apartment. I hear critters in the walls at night. It's a weird place. But there's a beautiful picture window that I write. I write at the table that faces the window. And I wrote the sentence that Chet Bond says, and I sat back in my chair and I said, oh no. Because for many reasons I said, oh no, because my heart was broken, one. And I will say that I couldn't write on the novel for a full semester after that, because I didn't know what was going to happen, and also because my heart was just broken. It took me a while to think through it and feel through it and figure out how Opal as a character, as my protagonist, was going to respond.
That must have been so satisfying, though. Terrifying at the time.
It was
thinking,
really scary.
How the heck am I going to land this now? Yeah. But so satisfying to figure out as your characters are figuring it out.
I'm glad I did.
Me too.
I was worried for a while, but I'm glad I figured it out.
I was thinking, another thing that struck me, you all are obviously writing, all of you, about hard stuff, like big, hard things, whether it's poverty or race or trauma. And I'll throw this one to you, Kirsten. You are writing about addiction and teen pregnancy and the Angel, the teenager, is also figuring out her sexuality in the middle of being 15 and moving to a new household and everything else. Do you feel a responsibility to, what's the word, to educate? Is writing a novel to you about educating as well as entertaining, which you're obviously doing? Like, what do you feel like you're doing as you tackle these things that are hard to work through, hard to live through, hard to write about?
You know, I don't think about educating the reader. I think if I did, that would feel terrifying and like such an enormous responsibility, and probably I wouldn't be writing fiction. I think the thing I most think about is, am I doing justice to the full humanity of my characters? And am I allowing them to be fully human? So, you know, sometimes in early drafts, I'm not. And, you know, I think Amadeo is a good example. I was angry at Amadeo. I thought he was a deadbeat father, and he's irresponsible, and he mooches off of his mother, and I was mad at him, and I wanted him to be punished by the book. It took me a while to realize that's not the stance I can take toward my character. It wasn't working, and I had to allow him to be fully alive. So I think that's more what I think about. And I would say that humor is I mean, all of the difficult material for me has to go hand in hand with lightness and humor and joy. Partially because, I mean, when I think about the hardest moments in my own life and in my family's history together, there's always levity as part of it.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's dark humor, but it's part of it.
Yeah.
But yeah.
I mean, what you're saying resonates about trying to find the full humanity of your character, and that maybe you give them short shrift in the first draft and then you're going back and trying to dig deeper. I think about that all the time as an interviewer doing journalism. You may disagree with somebody, you may not like them, but there's always a reason why they're doing what they're doing. And if you give yourself long enough to listen, like, why are they making these choices? There is always some reason, and I always feel so satisfied if I can get to that and understand. I may not like what you're doing, but I now get why you're doing it. There's a history with fiction, you're coming to it. There's no history. You're making it all up. But figuring out what is driving these people and what's informing their decisions makes a lot of sense. But I guess it also gets to the who has a right to tell a story. I mean, I said right before we came up on stage, I couldn't have written the novels that any of you have written because you're bringing a particular experience and background. I didn't grow up where some of you grew up. I haven't lived the lives that you've lived. And on the one hand, you're all writing characters who are very different from you, who've had very different life experiences. But I'm curious how any of you, if you did, wrestled with trying to write a male character, a character of a different race, a character who grew up somewhere totally different from you, thinking, am I remotely getting this right? How would I know what this person thinks or how they would act? Again, on the one hand, it's fiction. You have creative license to have anybody do whatever you want them to do, but it gets to also questions of appropriation and what feels, in this fraught moment of who has the voice to speak certain truths. Did you wrestle with that with any of your characters or at any point in your books? Jump ball.
I mean, I would just sort of echo some of what Kirsten was just saying about making sure that all the characters feel fully realized. I mean, I think that, there are antagonists in my book who are different from me, but I tried to get onto the page something that would sort of feed into why they do the things they do or say the things that they say. And I think it was important to take great care with that. You know, if you didn't, there's a danger of the character being too flat or too like just not believable in any kind of way,
and boring to write, which would make them boring to read.
Right, and so just taking care with giving them kind of motivation or some kind of backstory, even if it didn't always make the page. You know, I might have just thought about it a lot, and somehow it informs it on the page.
Right.
In
The whole
end.
backstory, which
Yeah.
may filter down to one off-the-cuff reply by your character, but you had
Right.
to know why they would have made that reply.
Yeah, and you know, I mean, it's a little bit of a spoiler to say, you know, that Nev does some questionable things in the book, but at the core, the thing that he and Opal have in common, they are both very ambitious people. It's just that their ambition manifests in different ways because they have different experiences. And it leads Nev down a path that Opal would not consider.
Yeah, I think there's something about, I agree with that, like this idea of bringing tenderness and respect to your characters and to the stories that you're writing about that are different than yours. I mean, I imagine a bunch of us like teach creative writing or have taught creative writing, and so it's a conversation I have with my students a lot of like who gets to tell what stories. And I do believe, I mean, you can write whatever story you want, and people can have whatever feelings they have about what you've written. And I think if you're going to write about an experience that isn't your own, you just have to be able to answer to that. You know, you have to be able to show that you've like done the work and done the research, and that isn't just like reading textbooks. I think there's something about also spending time with people and hearing their experiences in their own words. And I think being really mindful. I've been guilty of this, and it's something I try to think about a lot. It's like being mindful of like, am I employing a character just as a plot device, or am I employing their difference or their, you know what I mean? Like something about them that I find interesting just because it moves the plot forward, or they end up playing a sidekick to another character. It's like all of these tropes that I think we have to be mindful of as people that create creative content. And I think that that's something to like, again, it's like it's just bringing care to it.
Yeah. I want to give each of you a last word about how you write, how you get from some idea in your head to like a book that we can pick up and which you're going to sign for us tonight. And Kirsten, I will give this one to you first. The Five Wounds was a short story, a lovely short story in the New Yorker, but that's what it was. And then I gather, you kept writing short stories and they kept being about the same people? It was like trying to figure out, okay, what do I do with this?
Yeah, so I mean, after the story, The Five Wounds, was published, I had no intention of revisiting that family at all. And my now editor at Norton, Jill Bielowski, emailed me and asked if I'd considered extending it into a novel. And I wrote back and said, no, not at all. And I was working on lots of other short stories. And at one point, I had 3 sort of half-formed drafts of 3 stories, and I knew that there was some overlap among the 3, and so I was really trying to look at them, and I thought probably it's 1 story here, maybe 2, and then I realized, oh my God, it's the exact same constellation of characters as in The Five Wounds, the published story, and I thought, okay, so there's a lot here that I'm still curious about, and these characters have not released their hold on me. And so I decided to give myself the summer. I had it off from teaching, and I thought, okay, I'm gonna just see what happens in these 3 months and see if this actually could be a longer project. And at the end of those 3 months, I was just more interested in the characters and had more questions. So for me, the process of writing is really, it's about just spending time with the characters and seeing, you know, how they behave with one another, how they challenge one another and irk each other, and seeing who they become.
Yeah. What about for the rest of you? Anybody have a moment where you're writing and think, is there anything here that anyone besides my mother will ever remotely care about and want to read?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think I don't know that there'll ever be a time I try to write a book and don't have a moment where I'm like, this is trash, I'm trash, what am I doing? This is ridiculous. Why am I writing? Like, I think I do think that there's something to be said for when you've written a book or made an album or performed a play or whatever, like I think there's something you give yourself a blueprint to return to for the second time. So the first time is like you're really going into the forest with no map, and then the second time maybe there's still no map, but now you know what to do with the stars, or I'm going to stop this metaphor because I don't know anything about forests, but there is something to be said for just like I think you at least know. It's like any kind of suffering. You know that you've experienced it before, and you know there's an end to it. And there is an agony, I think, to writing and like losing the thread and being like, I don't know what's going to happen with these characters. Maybe this was all for nothing. Maybe I'm not going to be able to do them justice, which I think is like my worst secret fear. But there's something about being like, wait, I felt this before, and I like still managed to navigate my way out of it. And I like take a lot of solace in that. So I think that's something. Yeah, I think that's something that it's like any other muscle that you practice. Like you do it over and over again, it gets a little bit easier.
Yeah. I guess I would add to that for me, this novel was very different than anything else I've written, and I did feel this charge, like I was saying, to an answer to another question. I did feel a great sense of responsibility, so it was less about will anybody want to read this, but will I get this right? Will I do justice to all the people who want me to write about this topic, and will I do them justice? And then, as others have said, wanting to make sure that the full humanity of my characters came through, and making sure that, I stepped aside, because I think as an author, and this is something I think we try to teach our students, is that we have to get our own egos out of the way. Even though part of you is always in each character, you have to get it out of the way. You have to listen, as you were saying, when you listen to your, subjects, that you have to listen to the voice. Who is this person? What compels them? What makes them tick? What would they do, not what would I do? And then you have to navigate those waters. And like Donnie was saying, it took me 7 years as well, to get mine right, or as close to right as I could. And sometimes it was because a character made a decision or went through a life experience that was so difficult to actually get right. And once you got it right, you had to step back because it was very painful.
Do you know when you get it right?
You
do. You finish and you're like, that sentence, and you're like, okay.
You do.
No.
And that's where you also have to let it go. And you have to not worry so much about the readership or, how people will feel about it. You get a feeling, I got this right. And it is just magical, which I think is why I'll always write. I'm sure others here too. It's just a magical, transcendent, beautiful spiritual feeling where you feel like, oh my goodness, I got this right. And I hope I get it right again, and I'll be able to do it again.
Yeah. Donnie, you get the last word.
Oh.
It can be a tip you want to share for anybody out here who might have a book somewhere in their heart they want to get onto a page and trying to figure out, how do I do that? How do I start? How do I get there? How do I keep going when I have my moment where I think I'm crap, everything I've ever written is crap, this is all awful?
Well, I think, bouncing off what Miriam was just saying, you have to go for that magic, and you can't get there if you're not writing something that you feel is deeply important and that you are deeply interested in. And you have to lean into that. And, although, I'm so proud of the way that this book speaks to different people and the feedback that I've gotten, but it started from a really kind of selfish place and just my personal obsessions and my interests and my passions. And I think that's what brings you back to the page every day. That's what keeps you going, not what anybody else is going to think or say about it. Like, you have to start from that personal desire and that interest and that investment that you have in it. And if you do that, then people will come to it.
Yeah. Well, I want to say thank you to Hala, to Miriam, to Kirsten, and to Donnie for a wonderful conversation and for writing the wonderful books that we're here tonight to talk about. Thank you. Thank you.
Wow, thank you so much. They're gonna exit the stage, and we're gonna give them all one last big round of applause. Mary Louise Kelly and our 2022 finalists. Woo! And now for the moment we've all been waiting for, Danielle.
This is so exciting. And the winner is Donnie Walton, the final revival of Opal and Milk. Just like that. And I can put it back up here for you if you want.
Wow. Oh, gosh. A very quick first thank you to my publicist at Simon & Schuster, Brianna Scharfenberg, for reminding me to prepare something that I'm going to read from right now. Thank you so much to Aspen Words and to this year's judges, and for considering me in the company of these beautiful writers and big thinkers. Hala, Miriam, Kirsten, and Omar, if you're watching this. I was humbled to be shortlisted with you all and so grateful for the vital, vibrant stories you tell. I'm thinking in this moment about the significance of this prize and about one of the many real-life figures who inspired the style and sensibility of Opal, Nina Simone. An artist's duty, as far as I'm concerned, is to reflect the times, she once said in an interview that I've watched more than a few times on YouTube. Reflecting the times is often a daunting thing to attempt, because the times in which we write often feel dark and dispiriting and, worst of all, immovable, a frustrating cycle between progress and regress. There are those who claim to be uninterested and uninvested in what we feel and what we experience, those who prefer to cling to old myths rather than even consider that a messier, fuller truth exists, those truths that our fiction explores. There are those who deeply fear the discomfort that our what-if questions and our revisions of history can spark. But what gives me joy and hope is that as artists, we find and foster community. We encourage each other to use our full throats. We lean into art and into our stories because we know they wield that thing, as Nina Simone herself invoked in song like prayer, power. Through our work as artists, Miss Simone says in that same interview I like to watch sometimes, we will shape and mold this country, or it will not be shaped and molded at all anymore. And knowing how the books this prize celebrates can crack open hearts and then slip truth and empathy and light inside them, I believe what she said to resonate still. So for helping me sing out full-throated with this book, I'd like to thank my agent, PJ Mark, who believed early in Opal and in me. A million thanks as well to my 37 Inc. editor, Dawn Davis, who is dearly missed in books, but is now using her power to help transform another publishing culture, the one I came from, magazines. Thank you to the team at SNS, Mary Sue, Brianna, Leela, and Tim O'Connell. Thank you to my family. Hi, mamas, watching at home, cheering down south. And my friends of 20 plus years, some of whom are here tonight, Abby, Kenyatta, I love you. Thank you especially to my best friend and my partner, my husband, Anthony, who helps me think and feel and be brave every day. I love you. And finally, I would not be standing here without the community of writers and readers, especially Black writers and readers who said, damn a pandemic, and used every virtual and digital means possible to support this story. I'm looking forward to doing my part to keep our community going. Thank you.
All right, that's it. Thank you so much for coming. Please join us for a toast outside the auditorium to celebrate Donnie. And please also support all these authors by buying their wonderful books, which will be for sale in the reception area. And thank you.